Hello, my name's Kelsey, and I will be discussing the effects of eating disorders on adolescents and their development and achievement. Um, this presentation aims to investigate the effects of eating disorders on adolescents and how these disorders hinder the development and achievement in adolescents. So, we're first going to talk about what exactly is an eating disorder. The Mayo Foundation for Medical Education and Research in 2018 defined eating disorders as serious conditions related to persistent eating behaviors that negatively impact your health, your emotion, and your ability to function in important areas of life. Eating disorders require strict diets, such as not eating or you're eating consistently, and some involve compensation, some do not. And eating disorders are more observed in adolescents due to the fact that they're going through more developmental changes. They're really persuaded by their peers, and they're also persuaded by cultural and societal factors. So, I'm first going to talk to you guys about the vegetarian diet and how this is related to eating disorders such as anorexia. So, the vegetarian diet consists of no meats or seafood, and it cannot contain products containing either of those products. But on the other hand, it does include eggs and dairy and things like that. So recently, this diet has become more common due to its ethics in relation to the treatment given to animals. It's just been more known that animals are being treated and killed, and making the meat. Crazy, I know. And then in a study I found, Barncone and his colleagues in 2012 found that people with who have a history of eating disorders, they started out with this diet. So that was pretty interesting. Again, anorexia, I mentioned it in the previous slide. So this is where people are scared of getting fat and gaining weight, and Peterson and his colleagues defined it as self-restriction of energy intake that leads to significant weight loss. So again, they're just not eating, they're not getting the right nutrients, and they're just not eating. And it is the deadliest of the eating disorders. It has the highest mortality rate. And the next one is bulimia. So this is where people are binging and purging, but they're eating, but when they get alone, they're making themselves throw up, or they're using laxatives to flush it out of their system. This is how adolescents cope with stress, or if they're really feeling down and they feel guilty about what they ate, they'll just flush it out. On the other hand, binge eating disorder is just like bulimia, where they're binging and purging, but they're not using compensations. They're not flushing it out. And this has to do with guilt. They feel guilty about eating, but they're just not going to compensate with it. So yeah. What exactly is healthy eating, or how would you define eating healthy? So it's 3 meals a day with healthy snacks in between. Your 3 meals are breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And instead of eating chips and brownies and stuff like that, they recommend that fruits and vegetables are your snacks. It also says you need to drink water, tons of water, and eliminate the juices that contain a bunch of sugar. It does include dairy, or if you're lactose intolerant, you can drink soy milk, almond milk, things like that. And it also requires iron, calcium, and vitamin D. So why is it important for adolescents to eat healthy? So it actually affects their physical growth. I was doing a bunch of research on this, and I found that, puberty is involved with a bunch of growth spurts. So these higher requirements of energy that they need, it comes from the protein, and without this protein, it can actually stunt their growth, which I found which was pretty interesting. And Lossie and his colleagues in 2017 found that there's fewer pancreatic cells being produced if they're not getting enough protein, which causes diabetes, and there's a lower production of thyroid hormones that help you grow, which was pretty interesting as well. And these are just some statistics I found. I guess the one that I was really concerned about was like the 2.8% of boys use compensations, because in adolescence boys are worried about like not being buff enough, so them using compensations to like look skinnier was actually kind of mind-blowing to me. So now we're going to get into how these eating disorders affect academic achievement. So they're not focused on their school. They are thinking about other things such as, eating, what they look like. So they're not focusing on their school, which affects their, completing their in-person task. In one study I found, it was reported that 90 to 100% of people who have anorexia, they spend every second of the day thinking about their food and weight and how hungry they are, which I thought was interesting. But again, that affects their concentration. It makes them irritable, they're nauseous, they have headaches, and they have that lack of energy, which leads to a lack of motivation, which leads to their academic performances, going downhill. And so people with like anorexia have a high absentee rate because they're worried about what their peers are thinking of them. Are they thinking that they're too fat, or are they eating too much, and stuff like that. But on the other hand, in another study I found, by Bento and his colleagues, they found that if someone is like a perfectionist, their academic performance isn't affected. This is because they're worried about what they look like more than what goes on in the school. Okay, I'm trying to explain this the best I can. Again, so they're not judging themselves on what they do, they're judging themselves on what they look like, because they have these unrealistic expectations in their self-worth, and they feel like if they're not looking their best, then that's what's gonna, they have to look good to be good, if that makes sense. And that is because of what social media has done to their brain, which leads me to adolescent social and emotional development. So we all know, as 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, we all know that what we see on social media isn't always real life. But since our decision-making skills aren't developed till their mid-20s, this is why teens are easily convinced that these quote-unquote models that these teens are aspiring to be, they're not real. They're just not. They're unrealistic. And yeah, so that's why teens are easily affected by eating disorders, because they have this image of this thin woman and they want to be that, but we know now that that's not real. And these are just other statistics I found pretty interesting. 69% of people are age 12 by the time they own a phone, and 72% of the time Instagram is used, and that's where you're finding these quote-unquote models that aren't real. And 43% of people in his study in 2022 found that 43% of girls felt bad when they did not get enough likes. So social media, we know, it makes people feel excluded. For example, there's Snapchat now, and people can post on their stories all the time, and that's where girls really post their selfies with their girlfriends hanging out. But it can lead to people feeling excluded. You have cyberbullying and things like that. So teens who are in recovery from eating disorders struggle more with feeling like this, because they're thinking, oh, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not thin enough, or they would have invited me to these things. So that makes them feel guilty about what they look like, so that either leads to them binging or just not eating it all again. And according to the National Eating Disorder Association in 2019, 65% of people with eating disorders say that bullying contributed to that eating disorder. Yeah, again, that's so sad. So, how can school counselors help those in need with eating disorders? So there needs to be like school-wide education. It can't just be like you singling out someone. It needs to be like everyone understands what's going on, and this needs to be done prior to the 8th grade, because that's just where it's really where things start taking off in an adolescent's life. That's where they really start thinking about like what they look like, what other people were thinking of them. So a few ways this could school counselors can help is by like going to each class, but make sure it's like a core class that every student has to take. Like for example, in a health and PE class, a school counselor can go in there, like in the middle of like when the PE teacher's teaching about like nutrition and health. School counselor can like relate eating disorders to how it affects nutrition and health. And in English classes, a school counselor can go in and like have lessons on like media and what's like a persuasive advertisement and like what's like real and what's not. And the same thing for a science class, a school counselor can go in and talk about like how the human body works and how like the body compensate or the composition of what the body is and like what it needs to like thrive and things like that. School counselors also need to be aware of their school environment and make sure that it's a healthy environment for kids and staff. So like meal plans need to be looked at. I know bullying and teasing is like a big thing in schools, but I feel like if we're catching bullying before it gets too much, then that's going to help in the long run. And even sports programs, like those need to be looked at to see, like make sure these kids are actually, like they're eating enough to like go with the amount of work they're doing, if that makes sense. And in one study I found, Eberly and Wall, they found the 4 approaches that help the best with like counseling those with eating disorders, and it has to do with the cognitive behavioral therapy. So the first one is like observation and description. So this like teaches them how to be more effective in their life and things like that. The second one is interpersonal effectiveness. This teaches the student that everyone has problems, and like their attitude determines the outcome of that problem. The next one is emotion regulation. This teaches the student to like own their emotions and better understand their emotion, and it like decreases the suffering that these emotions are bringing. And then it also teaches the student to learn to tolerate distress in a healthy manner. So like if they are distressed, they can learn that like eating or not eating isn't healthy. And then some activities that I found to be helpful when I was doing my research is journaling. Journaling is really good. Some examples can be like list out 5 to 10 things that are going good in your life. What is the meaning of in shape, and have the student explain to the counselor like what does in shape mean to them. And another one I thought was really cool was like list their long-term goals, but it can't include anything that has to do with losing weight, burning calories, or things like that. Another activity which is really good is affirmations, such as like people care about me, I can eat without fear, like no one's judging me, and things like that. And then the most important one, in my opinion, is like letting them know their emotions are okay. Like it's okay to express these emotions. Like it's okay to cry. It's okay to like be mad. You can, like if they have like a favorite stuffed animal, it's okay to like, cry with it and cuddle with it. And then music is also like a really like good way to express your feelings, like just getting into the music and things like that. So to wrap it up, eating disorders are a very serious issue that needs to be addressed before like something catastrophic happens. Eating disorders affects their academics, their social and emotional skills, and their physical development. And if school counselors work closely with teachers in the community, then things things could look up. This is where I would say if there's any questions, comments, or concerns, but if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can just leave them in the D2L thing. Thanks, guys.